my name's Emma and I am currently a junior doctor, intern, PGY1, however you want to phrase it, working in rural New South Wales. I was previously an international student studying medicine in Australia from Canada, and I thought I would make a video sort of trying to break down and explain the process of how you go from student doctor to junior doctor, at least in the context and with the experience that I have. So if you are looking to apply to internships PGY1 in New South Wales and or are just interested in the process, then stick around. Before we get into the nitty-gritty explanations of it all, a couple disclaimers. Obviously, this is based off of my own experience. I applied in 2022 to start my internship in 2023. So processes change, applications change, and how the whole breakdown and odds and the graduating classes change. So take my advice as advice, but it is not law. It is not going to guarantee you an internship unless you're a local student. You should always make every decision, especially about your career, for you. Just go with what works best for you. And we have to start with some background knowledge or understanding. So first and foremost, the whole application process to become a junior doctor in New South Wales is run by HETI, which is the Health Education and Training Institute. I've looked it up. Who oversee the whole process as well as overseeing the training of the junior doctors when we're actually working. So you can find all of your information, or if you're looking for specific statistical information from the last year, you should always go to HETI as your source. The information on how to physically complete your applications, go to HETI, and go to the events that your MedSoc or the New South Wales MedSocs are running, or the information nights that HETI are running, to get sort of your most accurate and official information. And then for the sake of my terminology, I call myself an international student because I did my undergraduate studies in Canada. I was born, raised, citizenship in Canada, and then I came here for med school. There's also something called IMG, International Medical Graduate, and in my brain, that is someone who completed all of their studies abroad and are now applying to work in Australia. So your degree is from outside of Australia and you're trying to work in Australia. There are local students born and raised in New South Wales, and interstate students who were born and raised outside of New South Wales within Australia, Australian citizens, did their med school in Australia outside of New South Wales, so in another state, and they're trying to come in. You could be an interstate international student as well, and it all just gets messier and messier. So that's a couple terms that I think I'll use. I will splice in any other ones as they come up, but I think that gets us off to a good start. Finally, second to last bit of information or context that you need to understand the process is you need to know what category you fall in. And there are 6 different categories, and I'll put them up on the screen and I'm just going to read them out to you to make them make sense, okay? So category 1, those are your New South Wales graduates who are Australian and or New Zealanders who are applying within New South Wales. So if you have Oz passport, New Zealand passport, citizen in New South Wales, applying for a job in New South Wales, you are category 1. You get top priority. Category 2, were sort of born and raised in New South Wales, Oz and New Zealand citizens, but they did their med school out of state. So they're sort of almost local. You had to have done it up to grade 12, I believe, so your final year of high school in New South Wales for it to count. And basically the idea is you just left for medical school and now you're trying to come back. Category 3 are your sort of pure out-of-staters, interstate students. Maybe were in New South Wales occasionally, but you weren't raised here, and now you're trying to come in. Category 4, it's me. You are not local in any way, shape, or form, but you studied in New South Wales, so you're an international citizen, studied in New South Wales, trying to work in New South Wales. Category 5 would be me if I studied in Victoria. So international, studied out of state, trying to come into New South Wales. Following? And Category 6 are you are not Australian and you didn't study in Australia. It is an accredited program still, that's important, but you've done all of your training external. So you're international, born, raised, citizen, internationally educated. And those are your categories. And that comes important when we talk about how the allocation process actually works. Because your Category 1 students, you're guaranteed a job. And Category 4 students, we're not. And that plays into some of our decision-making process, or at least it did for me. And now we'll break down the actual application process. So there are 3 streams of applications, but really I think of it as sort of 2, with one having sort of 2 arms because you use them together. It will make sense. There's the Optimised Allocation pathway, the Direct Regional pathway, and the Rural Preferential Recruitment pathway. OA, DR, and RPR. Let's start with the Optimised Allocation pathway. You can think of that as like the Sydney pathway, the city pathway. It is a ranking, essentially, of the 14 hospital networks. So it's not just the hospital, but you kind of think of it as the main hospitals. And you rank them in order of where you want to work the most. And then they are allocated, trying to get the most people their topmost choices. So you rank them 1 to 14 or 15, whatever it is, and then it goes in the order of categories, with Category 1 being guaranteed their job. Not necessarily guaranteed their top 1 place, but guaranteed a job with the aim of getting it up in their higher, or their lower numbers, but their higher preferences. And Hetty releases stats that I do suggest you check out for a variety of reasons, but statistics on the percentage of graduates who were allocated into their higher preferences. And with that comes the Direct Regional Allocation, which is a select number of hospitals that are in regional Australia, so they're sort of close to cities, but they're not necessarily deemed in the inner city. They're not one of the city hospitals, although some of them are pretty darn close. And those ones play a caveat where if you put them first and you're a Category 1, you are basically guaranteed to get it. And if you put them first and you're a lower category, say I as a Category 4 person put a DR A as my top choice, that bumps me up in the Category 4 to be considered before the randomized draw of allocating the others. So with the optimized pathway, you rank them, and all of the Category 1s get it, but whoever gets theirs first, it's like statistically just worked out to try to get the most people their top choices, and after that, it's sort of your top of the pile will allocate you, and you go through the categories like that. So Category 4, we're not at the bottom, but we're not near the top, and we're not guaranteed. There's this thing called the stack. And essentially what it is there are certain networks that, for various reasons, due to where they're situated, where the bigger medical schools train, and how most people want to continue to train at the places that they're used to, they've probably moved closer to them. Variety of reasons, there are a few hospitals that sort of always end up juggling between the top choices. And a few years ago, people worked out that the way the algorithm potentially works, none of this is Hetty given, this is all word of mouth and a little bit of lore, but the math kind of makes sense, is that the med schools with the largest graduating classes will likely all have similar preferences, and therefore they're going to sort of put weight on different hospitals that will have more people choosing top 1. Every year, the graduating classes sort of culminate and create or look at statistically what's likely to be the number 1 choice for people, the most often chosen or desired hospital. So the idea is, if you want to try to force the algorithm to give you your choice, you put your number 1 choice, whatever hospital that is, and then you place the stack as what it is below. So say your hospital choice was usually the 10th choice on the list. So you would put 10 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11, 12. You put your choice up at the top. Different people have different opinions on whether or not it works. I have had friends that it's worked for, and I've had friends who didn't stack and they got their sort of like fourth choice. So it really depends on how you want to play your allocation. Especially my category 1 people, you are guaranteed a job. So if you will be happy working anywhere, but you've got a number 1 choice, why not stack? If you are really particular and you have a way that you would like those numbers to play out, list the way that you want to list. Obviously, as a category 4, it really didn't even matter for me, but for the international students, most of the advice that I was given is put a direct regional as number 1, though a direct regional that you would prefer, or one that statistically has more vacancies at the end of the year, wherever you want to hedge your bets, and then put the reverse stack. So basically, the ones that you know are less likely to be desired by the category 1 students, we put up higher, sort of forcing the algorithm to give us a higher choice, which is less likely to be chosen by the category 1s. I hope that kind of makes sense. Then there's the third choice to stay within New South Wales, and that is your your rural preferential recruitment pathway. So this is its own pathway. It is separate from the optimized allocation and the DRA. 2 separate things. You still have to do this one, so still think about how you want to rank things. But the rural options, it is a whole beast in of itself. It takes a lot more work, but statistically there are less local, less category 1, category 2 students looking to go rural for a variety of reasons. So some international students like myself feel like they're more likely to get a spot in rural. And I'll get more into why I made the decisions that I did at the end of the video, but it's something to think about. If you would be happy working rurally, what would that look like for you? With the rural preferential recruitment pathway, you do the same application portal that Hetty will demonstrate to you. Go to that meeting when they Zoom it on how to apply. Then there's like a second arm that you go through to declare that you're interested in the rural pathway, and then you declare which hospitals you would like to. So there's a collection, there's a group of rural hospitals, but they have their own application process. So for each one of these hospitals, you do a supplemental application, which is a pain. You collect your CV, you collect references. It's like a job application.
It feels like a movie.
You are actually applying to these hospitals specifically and individually, and so you should cater your responses to that hospital specifically. And then you get selected for interview. You interview at those hospitals, and then you rank those in order of your preference. So it's almost more like the American system if you're kind of used to that. And then they use an algorithm where the hospitals rank you, you rank the hospitals, and it tries to get the most compatible pairs, as well as staffing the hospitals, period. Now, there's a couple caveats for locals to consider as well, is if you apply rural and you get a rural offer, you do not get a city hospital offer. Rural offers come out, and if you get a rural offer, your optimized has been chucked into the bin, because there is a certain priority for New South Wales Health to staff its rural hospitals. And that, I think, is a deterrent for some people, which is honestly very fair. Some people would rather have their rural offer and their city hospital offer and weigh the two, but we don't get that choice. So applying rural up until the very end, until you could cancel, there's like a window, and if you want to, you could withdraw your application. But after that point, if you have not withdrawn your application and you get a rural offer, that's your job. So that's something to consider, and it's why personally I was more selective with the rural hospitals that I applied to, because I wanted to know that I would be happy and satisfied and felt like I chose that intentionally. I did not apply to every single rural hospital because there were some I didn't want to work at, and I knew that that could be a potential. There's also, again, disclaimer, this is not official advice, not official Hetty advice, but when I was going through the process, the way that I understood it to shake down is that, say, as an international student, I applied to all of the rural hospitals. but because of the way the ranking works, I just didn't line up. Even if after everybody in New South Wales who applied in New South Wales got jobs and that rural hospital had vacancies, I would not be told about those vacancies through something called the late vacancy management process. And the late vacancy management process or allocation process is essentially when all of the hospitals, when trades and switches have happened and the hospitals still have gaps, they reach out to the students, mostly your internationals, your interstaters, who didn't get a job, and say, hey, would you like to work at this hospital instead? And then we kind of like, it's like soap almost for our American viewers, and you gather up the scraps. So if Hospital A and me, I interviewed and I liked it and they ranked me, but the way the ranking worked, we never got allocated, and Hospital A still had vacancies at the end of the process and I still had no job, technically because we didn't match earlier in the process, it kind of shows up as a decline. So then I don't get to pick up that job, or at least not through late vacancy. Obviously, even after late vacancy, into the months of the year, if there's still vacancies, the hospitals post on the job forums, like New South Wales Health job forums, about internship positions. So you could get it then. But I thought that was a bit weird, and that was my understanding of the process, so look into that yourself, because I do not work for HEDI. So I personally chose to leave a few hospitals that often were either filled in the past few years by local students, so not very many Category 4, or often had vacancies that I wouldn't mind working at, and I chose not to apply to them so that potentially, if there was a vacancy, I could sort of scoop it up, if all of that makes sense. And then after all of that, there are still more options. You can apply interstate, so I personally didn't do that, but even as an international student, you are able to apply to Queensland, to Victoria, to South Australia, to Tasmania. You can do all those application processes as well. Victoria is much more like individual job applications to each hospital. It's a lot of work, and you have to look up where you fall in your categories and weigh up how much effort you want to put into scouring for a job as well. If you want to stay within New South Wales, there's always the private hospitals as well. And there's something called the Junior Doctor Training Program. And it is a specific list of private hospitals within New South Wales. Most of them, I believe, are within Sydney, who, through the government, are specifically accredited and allocated to be able to train junior doctors under APRA within HEDI guidance. So you get your registration at the end of your internship, but they're private hospitals and they're within Sydney. Personally, I saw those as sort of my backup, not because there's anything wrong with the private hospitals, but I did a lot of my medical school training at the private hospitals, and I sort of felt I wanted to see what the public hospitals looked like before I did more training in the private hospitals. There's a few of us who kind of described it as needing a trial by fire, because we felt like with COVID placements and things that we didn't get the public hospital pump that we may experience elsewhere. I don't know how much of that I'd consider still valid a few months in, but for me, the JDTP always felt like a bit of a safety net, which was really reassuring. If I didn't get jobs through the public system, I could apply through the private system and still hopefully end up gainfully employed. So to summarize all of that in the way that I did it, I applied through the rural pathway. I applied to select rural hospitals that I felt were close enough to Sydney or had transit options, had good training programs, and were sort of big enough to give me a good experience, a breadth of learning experience, and that I honestly felt I could live in those cities, as well as I placed a DRA as my top choice, and then I believe I did the reverse stack as it should be. I may have done one caveat and placed a less popular but growing in popularity, really tough hospital, maybe a bit higher than it's meant to be on the stack, but it doesn't matter because I got rural, so I'll never know how my stack worked or not. And I didn't end up applying interstate or privately. and I got a rural spot. Interviews were hard. I was interviewing while I was in India. There was a time zone difference, and rural Australian internet plus Indian internet, and it just, some of those did not go very well, but one of them did, apparently. And would I do it all again? That's really hard to say. I do have to say that given my year, we had less people graduating than previous years due to COVID delays and stuff. And it has stung seeing job postings for city hospitals who have vacancies, and I'm not eligible to get them because a New South Wales City Hospital won't sort of poach a New South Wales rural intern, no matter how hard we try, because in every healthcare system there is a priority to staff the hospitals. Or at least that's how it feels. And I get that. I get why I wouldn't be able to just abandon ship here to go elsewhere. But that has kind of stung, and I miss my people in the city. But everything that I thought I was going to be experiencing in rural Australia, I am. So I have found a nicely sized city that feels very similar to home. I have felt very welcomed. The patients are so grateful to have more junior doctors here, and there's a large number of us that are international graduates that are here, and the locals have really taken us in. I am learning a lot. I think I'm doing a lot. We overheated a little bit. So as I was saying, everything that I thought I was going to get in rural Australia, I am. I am being very well trained and very well looked after. I do think compared to some of my friends in the city hospitals, my JMO unit feels like they really care about me. Not just me as an employee, but me as a person and as a junior doctor. So they try to facilitate connections where they can, because there's less of us, so they can. And they want us to stick around because they need to. It's hard work. We are understaffed, as most healthcare is everywhere, but I do feel like we feel it rurally a little bit more perhaps. But that means I am getting a lot of overtime pay, and I'm learning a lot, and I do feel like I'm getting pretty hands-on, or I was able to get hands-on perhaps more than my peers in similar rotations in the city. But just like med school, you can only do internship once, so I really can't compare. I can only say what worked for me. It's not like I can do internship starting fresh again in a new hospital. Even if I started it in an intern job, I would have all the experience that I've gained thus far, and I'd be able to put it there. So it's what works for me, and I just want to reiterate again, you do what will work for you. So I know people who graduated med school with me, they were also international students, and they could not bear the thought, or could not, for their own personal life experience, move to rural Australia. So they just didn't apply, and they ended up with allocations in the city. I actually think all of them did, which again, it did make me question if I should have just applied in the city, but that's fine. And I know people, Category 1 students, who didn't get the hospitals that they wanted and are actually having a really great time. So it's one of those parts of medical school where some of your control is taken from you, but there is an overarching organization that is there to make sure that you get the training that you're required to get, and that you are well supported in doing so. And they do try to keep hospitals in check and keep balances in place so that you are getting those things and feeling trained and cared for, and you are an intern, so you are still on an apprenticeship, and you will be a good doctor. So it's up to you, especially my international grads, in how much risk you're willing to take on and where you're willing to allocate that risk. So for me, going rural felt like something I wanted to do for my own learning and growth anyways. It felt like a place I would be comfortable, and it felt like I'd have more control of my whole application process by being able to choose the rural hospitals that I applied to, and feeling like I got to be more selective there rather than just trusting chance. Other people, they were more happy with the accepting chance because for their life circumstances, they didn't want to go rural. Would I recommend going rural? That can be a whole other video. Short answer, yeah, probably to most people, but it's a decision that you have to make. And I hope I've helped answer and demystify some of the process. in this rambly video, and sounds very Hunger Games, but may the odds be ever in your favor. I hope the application process goes well for you this year, and I'm happy to try to answer questions below if you have more. But yeah, I hope all of that makes sense, and best of luck. And if you're watching this, it means you're probably nearing your final year, if not in your final year, so congrats. You are almost done. Make the most of your last few months of med school. It's a good time. I'll see you in the next one. Bye. And to any of my international applicants still sticking around, it's okay if you're feeling a little bit even jealous of your local friends, and your patience is running thin. I definitely had to ask my friends to stop talking about the odds of them not getting their first choice and what they were gonna do and how bad that would be, because at least they were guaranteed a job. And obviously I just drew a little bit of a boundary saying, hey, can you think of me? Can you check in before you go on those tangents, because it is really hard, and I want to be here and support you, but sometimes I'm stressed about being employed and I can't support you if I'm more jealous of you than I am supportive. And I think it helped some of them put it into perspective a little bit, and they were all lovely about it. So if you're feeling that way, it is valid. It's hard to be jealous of your friends, but you're not alone. I felt that way too. And it will all work out in the end, and you will still be so happy for them when they get their job offers, because it will likely come out before yours, and that's okay. You'll get there, and they'll celebrate with you when you get your job offer, and they will help you if you're doing late vacancy or anything else like that. So best of luck.